I'd like to welcome everybody to our Goattober Happy Hour. And I'm very excited to have Emily Nyman of the Arapawa Goat Breeders Association, President, with us today to talk about photographing goats. We are quickly learning as people are trying to market their goats, they're not very good at taking photos, and they're definitely not good at taking photos that really show off the best assets of their goats. And so hopefully for those of us here today and those that are able to watch this later, we're able to pick up some tips that will help us to better market our amazing goats. So I will hand it over to Emily. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. So let's see if I can get my PowerPoint to work. A little bit about me. Like Sarah said, my name's Emily. I am the AGBA president. I'm also the livestock manager at Conner Prairie. So I manage about 350 head of livestock total. I own two photography businesses, so KSC Livestock Photography and eMuse Images, and I was formerly a state fair photographer in Indiana. A little bit more. I have been doing photography for just over 11 years, and I did graduate last year with an associate's in photography. With that said, though, taking photos, you absolutely do not need any sort of degree to do this. I honestly just learned some of the technical side through school, but everything else was like in the field, pasture, practice, and learning and looking at what I have done. And I put two photos over here. So the bottom one was the first photo I ever took for a sale, which is actually the top doe's mom. And so it's just kind of to see, like, as time goes on, you will get better. It's just make mistakes, learn from them, have patience, and just be willing to be open and take time, because time is really what you need to do this well. So a little bit more. I was just here showing kind of the evolution of my photos. So the top two on the left and the bottom left were some of my OG sale photos. And there's nothing wrong with those photos per se, but there's certainly things that I would have done differently versus the photos on the right, where I've been able to adapt from what I have started with and gotten to where I am now with the poses and learning how to work with the goat versus against the goats. So why should you take photos? One, they're great for social media posts. That's one of the nice things about taking photos of your livestock, is that you get to share them with people, or you can work with them for sales. We use them for records. So I always take a photo of the day that I get a goat or a goat is born. And then I try to take photos every 6 months or so. That doesn't actually happen the way I want it to, but we can start watching for characteristics of how the goats change over time. And that's really important, especially with these more rare breeds, where you can kind of start to see with different genetics where like traits or spottings come in, and it helps us all just learn. And honestly, why should you take photos? It can make or break a sale. There's been a couple times where people wouldn't be willing to send me photos, or the photos that they sent me just didn't really show off the goat as well as it should have. And so learning how to take photos is super important. And then for us, our association does require photos for registrations. So sometimes that is required. What do you need? So one, you need a camera. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like a little point and shoot is fine. It can be your cell phone if that's all that you have or all that your budget allows for. I would say, though, to try to get at minimum a point and shoot. The photos just end up being a little bit better. You need pen and paper. If you're anything like me, you have a few more goats than you should. And not that all of my goats look the same. I can't tell my goats apart. But it is easier to write down the names of who the goats are in order. So when I go through to sort them, you can write down who it is. And then you can also make notes of like, okay, well, Jill today was being a little jerk. I didn't get a good photo. And so you can mark that on there so you can go back and take another photo. You need at minimum one helper. I have been able to take photos by myself, but having at least another person there with you will really help, especially someone who can move your goats into the position that they need to be in. If you can have two people, that's even better, but I understand that trying to have help sometimes isn't as easy, like trying to find people. And then if you have a goat who is super tame, can be halter trained, just gets along with the herd, they also can really help take your photos from just okay to really good. And then you need patience. If you get frustrated easily, taking photos of livestock is not for you. You have to be willing to take time and let the animals run off some energy, think, and then they will start working with you. So if you don't have patience, unfortunately, this is not for you. So a photo pen is one of the first things that you need to start thinking of before you take photos. You can take photos out in the pasture. Some of the issues that I run into out in the pasture is the grass might be too tall. There might be other goats behind them. You might not be able to like declutter the space as nicely. But so things that I have done is I will take lambing jugs and make them big enough so the goat can easily move back and forth at least 3 paces because you want them to be able to stand in a spot. In this photo, I actually have a hog pen that I was able to move my does into. The issue was there were some goats on the other side, and so they just kept looking out that fence. So making sure that there's less distractions really does help. My favorite thing to do now, though, is actually to take electric fencing. And with one of our barns, we've got a couple different doors. And so I have set it up where I can put all of my goats into one pen. I bring one out at a time, and I have the buddy goat outside the electric fence. And once I get the photo that I need, I can run them into a different pen. I know that's not necessarily everyone's setup, but if you can have a place where you put all the goats to start off with and then put all the goats that you're done with, that really does help because it kind of gets like a flow moving and your goats can kind of like think through what's happening. And then be mindful though in your photo pens, like what time of the year is it? Is it beautiful outside where it's like everything's nice and green, or is it really muddy? So you kind of need to be considerate of the landscape that you're in because not every area is good to take photos, and not all, like the entire time of year. Like I'm not gonna be taking photos in July, but I'm also not gonna be taking photos in February from the heat and then from the mud. So for us in Indiana, we're kind of looking more this time of year, October, November, where the grass is still green, but the weather is starting to cooperate a little bit more. Some things to be mindful of with your photo pen is watch your background. So I've got 3 photos. All of these photos of the goats are all right, but in the top left, there's that goat's brother is just standing behind him, and so it kind of makes his neck a little bit weird. The top right has got a wheelbarrow behind her and some of the barn stuff, so it just kind of clutters the image. And the one on the bottom, I still use that as a sale photo, but there's a feeder behind him, so I would have just changed those things. Be mindful of your lighting. If you have a lot of trees, the light can filter through and like make the goats look spotted in ways. So try to keep them away from like heavily shaded areas or areas with lots of trees. But you can also build a background. This is actually really common more in the cattle industry, and especially in Canada, where people will take round bales and they'll build a wall for a backdrop. But with goats, they're a little bit smaller, so I feel like you could take, square bales, straw, whatever, and you could just make a little background for them to stand against. The thing, though, is you kind of want to keep them off the background just a little bit so it builds like the depth of body that these goats have. Taking the photo. I'm going to have watch your light in here a lot because I really, truly mean watch your light. But the light should be behind you when you're taking photos, so all of the light is being directed on the goat. So you do need to be mindful of your shadow when you're doing this, but having that light on the goat really shows off the color of the goat. You need to be level with the animal. If you are too high, you're going to make the animal look small and like unfortunate. They're just not going to look right. But if you're too low, you're going to like remove their top line. You can make them look a little funny. You'll start building shadows around the animal, which will start to distort the way that they actually look. So for me, with our goats, most of our goats are short, and so I end up having to lay on the ground most of the time to take the photos, or I'm squatting, but I that hurts my knees too much. So most of the time I'm laying down or I'm sitting really close to the ground. If you do have a point and shoot or another type of camera, I guess even on your phone, you can see your screen, so you can move it up and down so you are not having to physically move yourself up and down. But the goal is to be level with the animal shooting towards the middle. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Getting your animals to pose. So we're going to talk about what poses should look like here in a second. But to get them to pose for you, you can, if you handle your goats a lot, and like if you're in a show ring of some type, you will train your animals to pose for you. But like with my goats, and I'm sure with a lot of people's goats, they're not show animals. So the best thing that you can do is to just have your human helper move the animals by pushing their flight zone, and just very lightly. You don't want to push them too much. And eventually they will just stand for you, and it's completely perfect. But you have to be fast because they're goats. They don't like to stand for too long. Having your buddy goat on the other side, the goat that they're used to, the one that's halter trained. For us, it's the Saanen doe who will clearly do anything I ask her to do. Having them where you want them facing or pointing their nose at really does help. And then if your goat panics, they typically will run off their energy. If they do not run off their energy, put them away and try them again. A goat that is panicked is not going to make for a good photo. You do want their ears up. You do want them looking in a certain direction. But if they're in true panic, like they're going to be so tense that you will see it in the photos. So these are a couple examples of things that I personally don't like to see in photos. So we'll talk about this. So in the top left, the lighting is actually behind the doe, and so it's distorting the way it looks. Same with the top right. That buck, like the shadows on him don't make it so you can see the color really well. And so those are just undesirable from my perspective. Sometimes that might be the best that you can get, but that's not what we're trying to go for. That middle goat, if you're taking photos out in the pasture, be mindful of how tall your grass is. Ideally, you should be able to see at least the top line of the hooves. Other than that, you're kind of just accidentally, you're losing them in the grass. This guy, he was only like 2 weeks old anyway, so the grass is taller than him, but you don't get a chance to see their feet and legs if there's any issues with them, if he has any special spottings. With the middle left, it wasn't a bad photo of the buck, but the way he's posed, where I was getting the angle from, doesn't allow you to actually see his full body. The bottom left, that's just that doe. I know that's that doe. She's not a great conformation doe anyway, but with the way that her legs are splayed, it makes her hips look off. She doesn't have a great top line. She looks just kind of sickly. She's not, but that's just kind of the way she looks. And then the bottom right, that doe is just actively moving. I could not get her to chill out. And so those are not really what you want to be showing people when you're trying to sell goats. So what do you want? The right side is a pretty good example of what I'm trying to strive for. The nice thing is with the posing, especially with these rare breeds, it's kind of what we want. We're not working towards a show standard. I do prefer where their front legs are even, where you can't really tell that they have two front legs, where they just have one front leg. And I like it where their back legs are just a little offset. If they are going to be offset, the back leg that is farthest away from you should technically be the one that is just a little off, not the leg that's closest to you, so like a little farther back. That way you can tell that they have, 3 legs, because their front only has one. They need to be perpendicular to the camera. So that's one thing you have to be mindful of is you can't necessarily just sit in the pen. I do try to do that just because I don't want to move too much, and I try to have the goats move right in front of me. But having them perpendicular to the camera is really important to make sure you get that full side. I like it with their noses just a little towards me. I want to be able to see that they actually have a face, that there's depth there. You do have to be mindful of the shadows, though, depending on the time of day. Their ears should be facing forward. So that's one of the things that at the state fair, it was always fun, was we had these little sticks with like pom-poms on the end. It worked really well with cattle. It doesn't work quite as well with goats, but having a second person to make a bunch of noises, jump up and down, get goats' attention is really fun. and you get to have someone who gets to be really silly with you. And so getting them to have their ears forward, when your person moves a little bit, they can get a little bit closer to you to move that nose towards you. When they're posed like this, you really get to see a lot of their features. The one thing that this does not show you, though, is if they're more of a dairy goat, like a mammary system. That's something that I am not well versed in, but there are ways to like look and learn about that more online. But for us, and I think for most of us, what we're trying to do is just get a good idea of what we're looking at. So you can see their top line, you can see the legs on them, you know, is there any issues with their neck? How feminine or masculine are they? Their horn structure is really important for quite a few people. So especially with those bucks, I really like to try to have their noses more towards me so you get to see their whole horn set. With that middle right buck, I went back and forth on this photo, but I just think it's a great photo. It really shows him off. It shows that like horn set of his off. But the nice thing about working with these goats is a lot of them will have a natural pose that they are comfortable with. So like that top left doe, you know, she really, anytime she stops, her front legs are always offset, and that's just the way that she feels most comfortable. That's the way that she's going to look her best. With that middle left doe, she's always just very square. You don't really know that she's got 4 legs. She always looks like she's got 2. Her nose is always forward. That's the way that she wants to stand. One thing that you want to try for too is to get their tails up. That's not something that you will necessarily do, but as you're taking photos, if their tail is down, sometimes it can make them look a little bit more rounded in the rump. And so if you can wait until their tails are lifted, sometimes it's just because they're pooping to take a bunch of photos. You'll probably get one where there's no poop in the photo. Even if there is, you know what? We're all goat people. We get it. And then lastly, while you're taking photos, take as many photos as you want, because at the end of the day, a lot of these can be used for social media. And so by just going out in the pasture with your phone, you can just take photos of your goats. You can use them to, you know, continue to educate people on these rare breeds. It's a good way to get people to you, like your Facebook or your Instagram, what have you. And it's just a good driving force because people want to see cute babies. People want to see cute goats. And it's just a good way to promote as time goes on. With all of this, truly, like, you know, if I were to be taking photos of 20 goats is probably going to take me an entire afternoon, if not an entire day. It took me, I think, 2 days this spring to do 60 goats, and it's just because I took the time and let the goats run off their energy and just really, truly be themselves, because a rush goat is just, they're not going to look as nice. And so I feel like that's the best tips I can give you guys, and I think that's actually all of my PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm so sorry. But I'm here to answer any questions from you guys.
So I do have a question about using a cell phone. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It seems like when I take pictures, I haven't noticed it quite as much in the goats, but I have pigs also, that it distorts their body shape. It makes them look way thinner than they actually are in real life. Have you noticed that, you know, in your photography with the cell phones?
With the cell phone, I have not. I've had pretty good success. Do you have an iPhone?
Yes, but it's not a newer one. It's like a 13.
Yeah, I personally haven't had much issues with that. You might be able to download Lightroom Classic on your phone, and I believe there's a way to like undistort photos. I use that on my computer, and it kind of helps flatten photos out for me.
Okay. Yeah, because, you know, you sit there and you've got this awesome animal, and then you look at your pictures, and it's like she looks like she's anorexic. You know?
I know. Yeah, I haven't really noticed that.
Okay.
Yeah, and if that's something, too, you might try to just aim a little bit lower when you're taking photos to see if that makes any sort of difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes with cell phones, too, if you back up and zoom in, you actually get a less distorted photo.
Okay. Okay, I'll try that.
They're made for more wide angle a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what could be doing that. And Emily, I wanted to say great information on there. I love photography. I've I did a lot of photography when I was younger, but I still enjoy it. And you just had some really good points in there, and actually talked something that I thought would be a good topic. So I was really happy to see that you were presenting on that.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's one of those things where when I actually get to take the time to go out and do it, I have a lot of fun. And so I hope other people get to have fun too, because if it's not fun, I feel like that can really just like ruin someone's day. Like really just being able to take the time to be with other people and be with the goats is what it should be about, I feel like.
Yeah, I like the pictures of what you look like when you're taking the photos too.
Yeah,
because that's exactly what it's like at our house. You know, you're laying wherever you need to lay to take.
Yes. This did make me realize that I don't have any photos of my photo pen set up. I was going through like 4 years worth of photos on Google, and I was like, I need to start taking more photos of things that I'm doing to take photos.
Right.
So that really made me more aware. So this fall, when I start taking photos, I'm going to be taking a lot more pictures so I can help people kind of actually visualize what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, here is I intended to set up something like that when we first got our pigs. They came before the San Clementes, and the people I see that were selling pigs for good money were the ones that were doing the proper pictures, you know, and they were walking them in front of a wall, and they had a specific spot you could tell that they were positioning the pig in, versus the people that were just like, yeah, I've got these pigs out here in the pasture. Do you want any of them? No, no, I don't. And that's kind of where we're at, because I never have followed through with it. And then the goats, of course, need it just as much as the pigs. But.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are, I'm sure every single state has some sort of professional livestock photographer. And so if people don't want to take the time to do it themselves, if they're willing to work with someone and spend the money, it is worth it, I feel like, if you can't do it yourself.
Yeah, I've thought that for years. And like the humane societies and things, it's like, look, folks, let's donate some money so they can take good pictures.
Right.
And they'll get adopted way faster.
Yes, for sure. I mean, really, truly, I feel like when I adopted my dog, the photo that they had of him was not a great photo. But after that, I was like, I mean, from the photo, he looked terrifying. But I got him and he was the sweetest boy. I was like, well, you know, he probably would have been adopted sooner if he just looked friendly.
I was going to say, too, I mean, though it's sort of a faux impression, but from your photos, it just seems like the goats should be well behaved. Like, oh, they stood still. They, you know, I mean, they look great, but they also, you make, you know, what might not be true, but inferences about their personalities. And I think, especially with San Clementes, when people are like, oh, they're feral, you know, it's important that we have photos that show, like, no, see, look, they're standing still.
Yeah, right. Yes. I almost feel like what you need from me is like a backtrack of the things that I say to these goats as I'm muttering at them, trying to get them to just stand still for 5 seconds. But no, I mean, I feel like that's important, is just to see like a nice calm goat, nicely posed, you know, for sure. And it's taken me a lot of practice to get to this point. I love it. And I do it with all the species. I actually had a harder time finding goat photos. I apparently take more photos of my cows, and so I was like, I don't want to use cow photos in this. But I have a lot of.
I would think cows are more still.
You would think. Mine apparently are not. They like to start bucking as they run off away from the camera, and I'm like, where are you going?
Oh, wow. I noticed a lot of your photos that you were indicating you would use to sell a goat as opposed to the social media posts. I noticed they were landscape instead of portrait. Do you feel like that's important?
I do, only from the perspective of you're able to use a landscape photo in a lot more things. So like you can use it on social media and you should be able to see the entire goat. For some reason, I feel like portrait photos tend to be skewed on social media and they get cropped weird, whereas the landscape photos don't. And that's also kind of just a standard across livestock photography, is sale photos or like the post photos are landscape. versus like your social photos, which can be either or. But your social photos are going to be more about like the personality of the animals versus like the body of the animals. Yeah.
Just your opinion, Emily, as we get better at taking sort of photos for sale, you know, SCIs aren't, don't have, you know, aren't standardized. And so we have some unique conformation traits that we're trying to keep, stuff like some of the sickle hawks and the steep rumps. And we noticed that a lot of our goats have this top line that right above their front legs has a small like hump and then straightens out. Do you think it's important as we're taking photos that we also have, that breeders also have access to like our judging standards so that people can be like, no, this is wanted. It's not supposed to look like a La Mancha or a Nubian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that is really important, especially like, I know I come kind of from a modern background a little bit, like modern livestock, so I keep that in the back of my head. But that's one of those things, like with these rare breeds, you need to be mindful of this, like the standard that's around them, if there is a standard, because like those traits are super important. So if you can show those off in photos, that's amazing. So like if there's a website where people can make comments of like, here's like what you're seeing and here's where it is within, you know, the SCI standard, I think that's really important for people to be able to see and know, because if they're coming from a modern livestock background, they're going to see that and be like, oh dear Lord, that's not what you want, and that's going to scare people.
Yeah, that was kind of me when I first encountered SCIs. I had come from an alpine background, and I was like, oh my gosh, the rumps are so steep.
Right.
Ugh. But now it's like, oh, okay, I get it.
Right, yeah. And for, I think, new breeders, that's such an important thing for them to learn as they're looking at goats too.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Emily?
I just have a lot of work to go do now.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, go practice. I didn't put on here a way to contact me. If I put it in the chat, do you want to add that to the YouTube?
Definitely, we can do that.
Okay. I'm just going to put it in here. People are welcome to contact me. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I am a toolbox. Please ask me things.
Your face has been going by on my recommended friends on Facebook for the last couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, that's the girl that's going to be. It was weird.
I'm a friendly person. Yeah, I'm glad that Facebook thinks so too.
Yeah.
Well, if nobody has anything else, then I just want to thank Emily so much. And I hope everybody, you know, will take heed her tips and give them a try. As I said, when we did spring sales this past year, it was difficult to get some beautiful goats sold because the photos were just, well, atrocious is being kind. It looked like goats basically had front legs and back legs and no bodies. And yeah, so I hope everybody will take their camera out and have some patience and give all of these tips a try so we have some wonderful photos for next season. And thank you, Emily, so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm so happy I got asked to do this.
And thank you for doing it while you had a cold.
No problem. I sound a little silly, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, great. I'm going to stop the recording.